Good evening. I'm Vikram Jandiala. I'm Vice President for Innovation Strategy at the University of Washington. Welcome today to CoMotion's 5th Innovation Chat. This is a series we've been doing for about a year or more, looking at interesting topics and bringing together the right people to talk about those topics. Our first 4 were on very interesting and different areas. The first one was around virtual reality and augmented reality. The second one was around the innovation ecosystem in the entire state of Washington. We had that in Spokane. The third was around cybersecurity and the challenges around privacy and transparency. And the fourth was around the role of design in innovation. And this was done in the art community of Titan in the middle of the state. So today is the 5th chat, and I'm very excited to have 3 leaders who will bring different perspectives to a very, very timely and important topic. Before that, for those of you who don't know CoMotion, just a little bit about CoMotion. It's the collaborative innovation hub. The goal is to expand the societal impact of the UW community. And as Senator Hargrove asked me, is it positive impact? Yes, we try to do positive impact. And the goal is by developing and connecting to local and global innovation ecosystems. We help the innovators at the university connect to the community and try to make the greatest impact from their discoveries. We do this through 3 areas. We do innovation transfer, so get the best ideas out into the community. We do this by innovation learning, which is getting the entire community, the students, faculty, to understand what innovation is about. How do you actually make impact? And the third is innovation strategy. At times of change, how do we actually adapt and modify and build partnerships? So with that, we're very excited to welcome you to today's discussion, which is really looking at inclusive solutions to disruption. And before I go a little bit into defining how we are going to look at disruption here so that we can keep the topic manageable, I do want to introduce our 3 panelists. So and let's give them a round of applause first before I introduce them. Next to me is former Senator Jim Hargrove from the 24th District, the Hoquiam District. He's a business owner, he's a forester, and the senator has seen firsthand the kind of disruption that we're going to be talking about and its impact and the challenges around that. For example, in the late 1960s, Washington had 500 timber mills and now has fewer than 100. And the most successful ones out of those are being highly automated. So it requires much less and fewer employees. His constituents believe that the status quo has not really worked and they need to try something different in order to restore jobs in that area. And we'd love to hear more from the senator on the challenges and how we address those. Next to the senator, needing no introduction to this audience, is our president, Anna Maricose. She brings many unique points of view from the race and equity initiative that she has led, from her own background in psychology, to the inclusion and access she talks about, to her latest impact around population health, which you might have heard about, which is really looking very broadly at health. And her perspective here will help consider what role higher education can play in creating solutions when disruption, which is in some sense unavoidable when disruption happens. How can you mitigate and even transform those effects? And last but not the least, Ken Denman, CEO of Emotion most recently, which was acquired by Apple. He's a seasoned entrepreneur and investor. He's seen and understands technology disruption and globalization disruption from the tech side. He knows the innovation ecosystem in the Bay Area, in Seattle, and in Colorado. And he has a personal passion to address these issues of disruption that we're going to be talking about today. Now, I do want to acknowledge that there's a lot of different definitions of disruption, and a lot of it is happening, frankly, as we speak around the world and in this country. We want to keep the topic here to serve the business definition of disruption. And I'll just read out what we're talking about. And these are things like technology change. As you know, one of the biggest changes in modern society is technology. When changes happen, whether it's the steam engine or when it's new business models like taxi ride sharing like Uber, there are disruptions. There are disruptions to entire industries, to jobs, to careers, to families. That's the kind of disruption that we want to talk about and see what can we do as a community and as a society to mitigate these impacts before they happen or even predict what's going to happen. We focus on technology not because we think technology is necessarily the most important, but it's the fastest moving out of all changes that have happened in society. And so it plays a key role, whether positive or negative. It's a double-edged sword. and we want to understand in that context. In a recent book by Tom Friedman talked about three effects which are happening simultaneously right now, which are changing the dynamics around the world: technology, globalization, and climate change. So here we are focusing on technology as well as globalization, which in some sense has been accelerated by technology itself. So a lot of it will focus on technology, but we are looking at the social impact today. Now, I do want to acknowledge that this can become a very difficult conversation to have. It's an important conversation to have. There's a lot of passion around this topic, and rightly so. The impacts we're talking about due to technology has direct impact on the lives of people, positive and negative. So we want to have an open and honest dialogue, and we expect it will be done respectfully. We believe one of the most important things we can do is build greater communication and understand all sides of the story. And this is an ongoing discussion. At the end of the conversation today, I'll talk about what we'll be doing as a next step as well. So it's really one in a series of connections that we want to make, because this is really not just for us, it's for our future generations, it's for our children, to create a kind of world that we want to build, which is inclusive and where equity is in focus and inequity is reduced. And with that, I'm going to start by actually talking about Twitter. And I mentioned Twitter because those of you who are Twitter friendly, or those who are logging in from outside, the hashtag is COMOChat, C-O-M-O chat. So if you want to send me questions on Twitter, speaking of disruption, Twitter has disrupted us recently in many ways. You can send questions to COMOChat at the end of the discussion phase. I'll pull out my phone and look at questions. In addition, we will have our Commotion folks with slips of paper for you to write down questions as well. So with that, I'm going to ask Ken for his definition of disruption and what is the role of technology industries as he sees it in both creating the disruption and mitigating the disruption.
I tend to lean on Clayton Christensen's definition. Basically, innovation and disruption are near to each other, but disruption takes sort of that left-hand turn and really uproots industries, markets, and even technology. And I think that is, it says that innovation is important, but you get to a cumulative impact of innovation and sort of the world flips. The impact of that is often that in the near term, call it a generation or two, the implications to people are enormous. Long term, there's lots of opportunity, there's scale, there's more efficiency, there's a lot of goodness that comes longer term, but inevitably in a shorter period of time, and that often can be a generation or two, we see massive impacts to human beings, to people, to work, we see a replacement or a reduction in the amount of meaningful work. And so there's a broader conversation to be had about how do we get in front of that? How do we as technologists, I'll just speak for myself, I think we've done a horrible job of driving a dialogue, of driving a discourse around the real impact of what we do. And as a consequence, there's this void where people are trying to understand in that dislocation what the hell's going on. And other people can come in, take the ball and say, I know what the problem is, and we don't work the root cause. You get further down the road, there's even more concern, more fear, more panic, which could lead to chaos. And I think as an industry, those of us that are in the technology space really have to get our game together, get our game up, and do a much better job of getting in front of it and talking about it early, often, and at a lot of depth about the human impact.
Thank you. Senator Hargrove, you've seen firsthand the impact of disruption as we're defining it here for a while. And so I'd love to get your thoughts on what you've seen, and also how have you attempted with your constituencies to address that issue?
Well, I know we were talking briefly about technology and that kind of innovation and how that causes disruption. From our perspective out in rural timber country, that's kind of like climate change. It's kind of like the tide rising. And what we've had happen to us the last 3 or 4 decades is more like a tsunami. And that's what government has done to our area, whether it be spotted owls, the latest is marbled murrelets. When I first moved to Grays Harbor 40 years ago, there were dozens of lumber mills. There was huge labor unions, International Woodworkers Union, and a lot of labor jobs, good family wage jobs out there, people that were actually cutting green building products that now your College of Forestry is starting to show that a managed forest actually sinks more carbon over time than just letting it sit and stand in an old growth forest. Not that we should cut every old growth forest, but the point is that forestry and using wood products is much better than steel and concrete. We have things in government that have been set up, whether it be LEED standards for buildings that only count the energy use forward and none of the embodied energy and the materials that go into that building. You could build it out of pure plutonium, and yet if it doesn't use any energy going forward, you become a LEED silver, LEED gold, whatever. And you should be using wood products, which obviously when you use a 2x4, you plant a little tree that sinks carbon like crazy behind it. And so I think part of the disruption from technology has really been kind of minor on a scale, at least in my region, compared to kind of these massive government changes. Some of the trade deals too, and I think, well, first of all, let me say, not first of all, I guess I'm about 3/4 into this, but I'm not a Trump supporter and I didn't vote for him. But that makes me a minority in my community. And in Grays Harbor, they voted for a Republican president for the first time since, I think, Calvin Coolidge. And a lot of that is because they've been listening to Democrats talk about jobs and being for labor and all that. Well, all of those jobs have gone away. And so it's, you know, we have, I don't know, I'm going to spill all my beans here, but, you know, we have land use laws down there that are same as in Seattle. Well, we haven't had our population grow in Grays Harbor for 2 or 3 decades, you know. We have shorelines requirements down there where we have mostly pristine shorelines, and you guys have messed your nest. You know, you need to have those regulations up here, but one size doesn't fit all. So when you lay that down on our community too, it becomes an impossibility to grow and to have enough economy to put people to work. So I don't know, I told you I can go on forever, but I have one little other thing I'll say.
You said I could stop you as long as
you
I'm
can
not
stop
rude.
me,
Okay.
but I don't know if that's going to work. But I told you to try, but anyway, he's much too polite, you know. But I got an email from the Co-Motion Center and said solutions. So should solutions be programmatic, like more social safety nets and universal basic income? I'm sorry, I about gagged when I saw that. It's kind of like just government, like just let up just enough so that people can take their businesses, develop them. Now we're looking at things like CLT, and I think the university is working on some of that. Believe me, to use cross-laminate timber, you still have to cut trees. I'm sorry, we got to stop looking at the micro environment and look at the macro environment. And if we don't solve climate change, we're going to have deserts out there. It isn't going to matter whether you preserve this little stream or that little whatever, because climate change is going to swamp us. So the point is that don't be selective on your science. Use all your science. Use your science from your good School of Forestry here, and have not a one-size-fits-all kind of policy for an urban area that's got a high density of people and lots of problems. You're not going to stop me now. So you get to rebut at the end here. So we pour billions of dollars of infrastructure into Puget Sound. We're building a $5 billion tunnel to move cars 1.5 miles over in Seattle. Billions of dollars into the University of Washington, to highways, and when more people move in, we just build another lane. And then guess what? We create all the stormwater problems that go into Puget Sound, and then we got to spend billions of dollars to clean up the mess we've made. You think maybe it would make sense to expend some of those billions of dollars out in the rural parts of the state, create some jobs out there, and maybe not continue to put that money into Puget Sound? Now, that's challenging because that means your standard of living might not be 3 times what the standard of living is in my area, because that's basically what it is now. It's just about, I think. So anyway, I'll stop. I'm sure I'll get revved up again, but.
Well, thank you, Senator, both for speaking and for stopping. I appreciate it. But you bring up very, very important points, and I appreciate the passion behind what you've seen. From the viewpoint of the university, we've been talking about inclusive innovation, which is really a goal to cover many of these challenges of understanding policy innovation, understanding impact, understanding that you can't just optimize a local system. And President Corsi, I know you're very passionate about how to build, so not just skills, but a mindset which will keep the students going through the future. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, I think that universities are kind of uniquely positioned, and we have an obligation to be both timeless and timely, and to balance those. You know, there used to be a time when you had to go to one of the great universities just to read a particular book, and now any kid, you know, whether it's in, you know, Moscow, Idaho, or, you know, Moscow, Russia, with a modem, has access to, you know, all the knowledge in the world. I think that when we prepare students, I think that some of the timeless qualities of a university are more important now than ever. What I mean by that is critical thinking skills, the ability to communicate. I think a lot of what we've been talking about is what I would call unintended consequences. And they can't all be foreseen, but you can foresee some of them if you think a little bit down the road. That sense of ethics and responsibility. You know, sometimes we get into these debates between, you know, are we educating people for citizenship? Are we educating them for, you know, vocational? It's a silly debate. The answer is, of course, both. But I think that as we're thinking about training, workforce development, which is incredibly important, we have to be thinking about those skills that are timeless because the jobs are changing so rapidly. And, you know, most of us are going to have, even if you stay in one place, the skill set to do the same job is going to be. I did my dissertation with data cards to carry them around, you know, I mean, and so I think we really need to be working with our students to educate them more broadly, and that's, I think, particularly the case in areas like technology and business. You know, in my field, psychology, when I used to have time to do research, you have to get your research approved by human subjects. And it had to be approved by human subjects so that you could see. I mean, you had to justify that how you were intruding into someone's life, even with their permission, was going to have positive effects. And you also had to talk about the fact of how were you going to mitigate negative effects. So, you know, for example, we might, to look at the effects of stress, you might have someone, actually one of the most stressful things that people can do is talk publicly. And, you know, and so, well, what if someone does have a panic attack? What are you going to do? Well, we need to, I'm not suggesting that we run everything through human subjects boards, but, you know, that same mentality for our students who are entrepreneurs, for our students in business, for our students in technology. You know, yes, we want you to go out there, and right now the speed of change is rapid, and, you know, but think about the unintended consequences. Think about how it might go wrong, because you know what? If it can go wrong, probably at least some of it will go wrong at some point. And so it's that kind of broad-based education. It's the team-based education where you have different people. I mean, one of the things that, for example, we're trying to do in our population health initiative is involve more social scientists because they have a different view and they are thinking more broadly. And, you know, of course, at universities, we not only are educating students, but we're involved very directly. I mean, through CoMotion, we have folks that are starting companies. We have entrepreneurship programs for our students. And so, again, trying to think ahead of not just how do I make the next dollar, not that there's anything wrong in making that next dollar, but also, you know, how can I be thinking about the negative disruptions? Also, one of the things that we try and get our students to do is, as you're thinking about building new things, do them in partnership with people in the community, because maybe you won't be able to think about the unintended consequences, but they will be able to do that. And maybe involve some of the people that will be served as we're doing work in healthcare, involving people that have those kinds of issues or problems and thinking about how you create things.
Thank you. So, Ken, so leading off what President Kase and Senator Hargrove talked about, I'll use some of the terminology which is very relevant here. The Senator talked about sort of tsunami versus climate change, and it's impacted that industry, the timber industry. But the expectation is that over time, that tsunami is going to impact more and more industries. So what's your long-term view of the impact of technology? I know you are sort of bullish on the long-term view. What makes you bullish on
Well, as most CEOs are, I tend to be an optimistic person. It's the nature of the beast. But I do believe in the power of people, and I think that over time, over long periods of time, we figure it out. I'm not one of those people that says that this devolves into chaos and revolution and all that kind of stuff. I think that we as painful as it is in the intermediate time, leaders step forward, people come together and figure out solutions. So that's the starting point. To be more pragmatic, I would say we are headed to a period of time where there will be less sort of hard labor, less boring, sort of less valuable work. And one of the outcomes of that is very likely that many people will begin to have the opportunity to focus on things that they really value, that they are more passionate about. Now, there's a whole lot of issues between here and there on the policy side. What do we do from a policy perspective? And it may feel like I'm wandering in the la-la land, but I do think that we as a country and a world are going to have to figure out what we do to make sure that people can be wholesome contributors to society, doing work that is valuable, maybe with other people or for other people, or maybe being more artistic or whatever it is. But the nature of work, there is no doubt about it, is going to change. Technology is going to drive that. Given that, the question then is, how do we navigate that transition, and how do we support people in those endeavors? And to some of the comments that Henri just made, I think one of the things that we will do is help people be more broad in their perspective. I mean, there's a whole bunch of people like me chasing software engineers who know how to do machine learning and deep learning. But guess what? 5 to 7 years from now, there's going to be a lot of open standards machine learning solutions out there. And a lot of those roles, we're going to need fewer and fewer of these, frankly, the academicians and the other folks that are actually building the data sets, because we're going to automate that. So, innovation never sleeps. Nobody's safe. And so the consequence is that we have to keep growing and thinking about, the longer term implications and what's going to happen. The corner cases keep showing up, and we got to get ready for the corner cases. So I'm saying, start thinking about the fact that as hot as big data is and deep learning and machine learning folks are in the marketplace today, that sun's going to set. What are those people going to do? Are they going to be equipped with enough sense of humanity and humanities to be able to contribute to teams, to be part of something? Are they going to be able to get the entrepreneurial education and support to partner with other people and go out to Hoquiam and start an interesting business?
But if I might add, because I'm also, I may be
It's okay to
even
interrupt
more
then?
of an optimist.
It's okay to interrupt then without being prompted? I just want to get the rules straight here.
Hey, I'm his boss.
Okay.
He might be able to stop you.
Rules have always been different for us in the rural area, I understand.
Oh.
Go ahead.
No, what I was going to say is that, what
It's not
I
your
think,
turn, I'm sorry.
being ever, I'm also an optimist, is that the more you can disrupt and not have the jobs all be about automation and things that machines can do, the more important what it is that's unique about us as humans becomes. So, for example, we're dealing with some of that with advising jobs. And, a lot of what advisors used to do was very transactional. They'd look at someone's, what classes you've taken. Well, you need to take these 4 more classes for this major and have you, done your distribution requirements, and it was a very kind of transactional kind. Now, actually, you can put it through a computer and it'll tell you those things. So instead, when you interact with the advisor, you can really be talking about, what kinds of things do you really like, and how's this major going, and have you thought about these after-school activities? I think that the danger comes when instead of, okay, so how can we make this more human? How can we make this, it's like, okay, here's an efficiency, we can cut these jobs. And so, it's that kind of thought. I mean, I think sometimes we look at, you can replace this, so I'm going to squeeze out that last penny, instead of how can we change the nature of the job so that, quite frankly, it's more fulfilling for both.
I think one argument has been that technology is good at extracting efficiency, but not necessarily creating efficiency always, right? Which is new efficiency.
Or creating value.
Right, central.
So what strikes me here is that what's the name of that pyramid, where you got to have air and food and all that stuff?
Maslow's hierarchy.
I learned that once at college.
See, look at that, you still remember it.
I remembered it was a pyramid. You guys are sitting on the top pinnacle of this thing. I don't even know what kind of jobs you're talking about here. But if you look at, even in the United States of America, when you look at like just this last election, I mean, I don't know if any of you looked at like the congressional districts that voted for Trump.
Yes.
Other than some urban centers, which is where you live, and some academia that couldn't believe anybody would vote for him, the media, which blasted that all over the place, probably helped Clinton lose, by the way, because it was going to be a landslide, who needed to go out and vote. But the point is, outside of that, people still don't, they work farming, and they work logging, and they work doing things. I don't even know what kind of jobs you're talking about, and that's in the United States. Something like half of the wood in the world is still burned at people's cooking fires. That's half of the usage. You're talking about billions of people out there that have never even seen a suit, probably, So, I mean, you got to think about, as you do technology and innovation, who are your customers? Because, like I was just reading online, I do have the internet, by the way, that Amazon has come up with a new grocery where you don't need checkers. You just walk in and grab the food, and you go out, and it automatically bills your credit card. Who's going to buy the groceries if there aren't any checkers earning any money? I mean, I'm not saying that innovation can't help, but you've got to think in terms of kind of, I love this was a college term I learned, holistically, right? You got to figure out where are people going to work so that they have the resources to buy the efficient products you produce. Right now, what we've done is we've turned the United States into almost a third world country where we export our resources. They all get manufactured in China, which I guess is fine. You buy them at Walmart when they come back. Their labor laws, their wages, none of that's the same as in this country. So we've got these governmental systems that are set up to disadvantage US workers, and it's not even using technology. In fact, I know of, maybe this is another thing I read on the internet, everything you read, you believe on the internet, right? Is that some major car companies have gone over there with their assembly lines, and the Chinese said, no, you're gonna use 1,000 people in this plant, because they have to put those people to work. Because they realize that that's part of that, and I'm not suggesting we become communists, by the way, so let's be careful here. But the point is, you need to look holistically at the point of who your customer's going to be. If your customers don't have any resources to buy your products, it doesn't matter how efficient you get with your technology or your innovation. So I'll stop now and wait for the next topic.
Thank you.
I'm being really
Great thoughts around
Surprisingly,
that.
we don't disagree.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate it. The more I find out about what I'm doing here, the more I appreciate it. So,
So the senator's point that, in some sense, can your view, I would say President Carr says somewhere in the middle, is that somehow technology is a force for good in the long term. Now, when we've seen in the past things like the Industrial Revolution, it did create efficiencies, but also created loss of certain kinds of jobs. In fact, skilled labor, artisans were put out of business, and really boring jobs on the industrial line came into being. So in that short period in the 1800s, you actually lost good quality jobs, and you got the only option you had was to work on the industry line. So where does the feeling that this is sort of a monotonic improvement, where does that come from? And is there enough evidence to show that that's actually true? Or does it require more thought around how to leverage technology so that whether it's regulation, whether it's different regulations in different places, do we need a different equilibrium, which is not just driven by the market?
Yes. So I would say that throughout history, there are always windows of time where bad actors take technology and do bad things with it. That has always been the case. It likely will always be the case. Having said that, that tends not to last very long because the damage to people and our sense of humanity and ethics ultimately cause that to change. People rise up, and we've seen it time and time again throughout history, whether it was through the thing that spurred the growth of labor unions to begin to right those wrongs and to give more power to those people. Those cycles continue. So I'm looking out over a longer period of time to be sure. There are short windows of pain, and believe me, I think we're in that period now. Absolutely agree with Jim's comments that we have a lot of people in this country, in parts of our country, who are deeply despaired, confused. They have no idea how they're going to get out of the circumstance that they find themselves in. And as a consequence, they are rising up. They're expressing their views. We're going to see similar things happen in other countries around the world. But I would say that even in China, the clock is ticking. Right? The clock is ticking in China. There will either be a revolution or there will be change. And the leaders there know that. It's one of the reasons they push so hard on some of the behaviors that because they don't have enough bullets to kill everyone that will come at them. And so my point here is, in China and Vietnam, if you look at what we're doing with 3D printing, or what can be done with 3D printing, eventually that will happen in China and Vietnam, and we will see displacement there. And so, as I said, innovation doesn't sleep. The question is, do we have the humanity, the ethics, the foresight to do the right thing, and to try to do the right thing before there is too much carnage and pain? We're behind the curve, once again, in the US. Unfortunately, we are behind the curve, and we're going to have to address that quickly.
So unfortunately, if it isn't addressed, and leaders who are threatened, that's when wars start. Because they need to focus their whole country, their whole economy on something other than what's going on there. And it doesn't hurt to kill off millions of people either in the process, because then you don't have as much to worry about. I mean, I'm just saying that's how it's happened. We've been real concerned about that during the whole Cold War, when Russia's economy started to sink, about whether they'd say, oh God, we got to go out and start a war. So, like I said, I'm not a communist, I'm a Democrat, but I do believe in redistribution of wealth. Yes. We have the state with the most billionaires in this country is the state of Washington. And we're just about ready to get our first trillionaire, I understand. And I say we should redistribute wealth by letting people earn it, by getting out of their way a little bit and letting them earn it. And it seems like sometimes wealth is set up to keep themselves comfortable and keep themselves well off. And I'm not talking about any individual, nobody take any disparity here. But I think my wife coined this phrase that Seattle wants us to be pristine and poor on the Olympic Peninsula. And other people have said they want us to be their REI backyard. In other words, they have a great economy, they make a lot of money, and they want to come play in my area. I don't want anybody to cut any trees down, for Pete's sake, because that interrupts with their play. And we heard for years how tourism was going to be the replacement for our timber economy. You should switch to tourism, that's great. So we finally got an investor to look at Westport to put in a Scottish Links type golf course and some condos, and he got sued so many times over so many years he finally dropped the whole project because nobody wanted any development, for Pete's sake. They just wanted people to drive around and be tourists and go home. I mean, the only thing economically that we've got that's really been an addition in our area, other than a few little things the port has done, is a prison. And you guys would fight to keep a prison out of your area, And I fought to get a prison in our area, and thank God Mike Lowry agreed with me, and we have some fairly good employment there. But it's like, I want you to be careful not to see the solutions here as like giving some spare change to the rural areas. We don't need $1 million for an economic development plan. We don't need some technology help to people come out and tell us how to do things better. In fact, right after the spotted owl, that happened in Forks. People said, oh, you're going to do value added. You know, instead of just logging all these trees and cutting 2x4s and letting it go, you're going to set up a mill that's going to cut metric shapes, and you're going to make furniture, and you're going to do all that. They lent people, in fact, I think one of them works at the university, Larry Mason. Does he still work here? I don't know, but he used to work over in forestry someplace. He had a mill, and he borrowed a bunch of money from the Small Business Association, a business administration, to take and retool that to do value-added products. There still wasn't any fiber to put through his mill. So all he had was another layer of debt. And he ended up escaping to your bubble, and I think he worked for Centrifor or something, as a matter of fact. So go ahead. I'll stop again
No,
until I
I
get
think,
irritated.
Jim, you make a really, really great point, though, about, which I agree with completely, this term. I hate the terms and the slogans because sometimes they mask a broader conversation. But income distribution or the reality is we have fewer and fewer people owning more and more of the wealth, including in my industry, in the technology space, and that's not sustainable. It's just not sustainable. We are going to have to, as a society, figure out how we're going to support people. Some people call it guaranteed income security. Some people call it guaranteed security, and others call it just providing opportunities for people to build businesses in areas where they need to build businesses. We're going to have to deal with those policy conversations because the direction we're headed is not sustainable.
Well, I think what's happened, I have one of my housemates from graduate school wrote a book called The Winner Take All Economy. And I think we've always had, any new thing creates winners and losers. But I think that the kind of degree of it has really become extreme. Yes, extreme is exactly the right word, and that does create, we know that when there are those extremes, you tend to see more aggression. You're much more, because they're right next to each other in many different ways. And again, in our population health work, we can see, even here within zip codes, a 7-year difference in lifespan, just a few miles away, depending on where you are. I think that whenever you get this disruptive change, you're going to have a period of how do you readjust. But because of those extremes, it's been harder. I mean, think about the Industrial Revolution. One of the outcomes of that was a work week. That, I don't know how many of you work 40 hours, but, as you can see, I'm still here. But still, there was at least a semblance of a work week. I mean, wouldn't it be nice if we had the 3-day weekend, because now we're being more productive and we'd have more time for leisure? Or, if we think about technology, now, I mean, one of the things that I think has been very difficult, for example, I come from a good Cuban family, that my going away to school was just not something you did. And it was very, and I talk actually a lot when I'm talking to some folks, particularly on the East Side, Latino families that don't want their child. And so it's we can now deliver education to those areas without people having to move. More and more people could work from those areas and not have to, I have my spouse's dad during the Boeing recession built a one-room kind of cabin out in Lilliwap. So, I'm familiar with that part, and you do see signs like, a
Did he
working
get his septic
forest
system approved?
for working families, and there is this kind of incredible frustration, and I think it is important. I mean, you're getting back to the notion of, we're living in bubbles, and, here we are not very far away, and even if we do go over there and we're taking the hiking paths and we don't realize what we're hiking in and what are the people there. And I do think that that's the kind of thing we need to think about. a more equitable society, and I don't mean, I'm not a communist either. In fact, my family fled from that. But something that's more equal than what we have now actually makes everybody happier, including the people who have more, because it's not fun for them to have to be in gated communities and to, because we're scared of going out there.
There was an article that the 8 richest people in the world now have the same wealth as the bottom half of the world's population. That's staggering, right? If you think
Well, and in all honesty, some are really giving back and trying to make the world better.
But what do you feel about that as and these are great individuals, no question, but people talk about minimum wages. Nobody really talks about maximum wage. Is that something that, what's your view on a cap on how much the value of what you're providing really matters to the world?
Personally, I just don't, I can't wrap my head around how you would actually execute on something like that when, you have people that own businesses that, I'm actually more focused on the other end of the spectrum, which is, what is a methodology? What is a plan for making sure that we don't have such a low end, if you will, of rewards from society? So, for instance, one of the things that's been talked about in some of the conversations I've had is, is there an opportunity for some kind of minimal national service that basically creates an opportunity for you to, that's your covenant, that's your buy-in, because, and once you've done that, there's some modicum of health care you're always going to get. There's some modicum of housing support that you're always going to get. There's a floor under you at a minimum. Doesn't mean we're going to be communist society. It just means that we're going to take care of people because we know we have to. We're going to take care of it one way or another. But I'm thought we had the GI Bill. People went. We had the draft, but there was a covenant there, and we've lost some of those mechanisms.
Well, and it's worse for everybody. No one likes, being, when you go out having homeless folks. It's difficult for people, and we become immune to, even but you asked the question about, maximum wage. Well, we used to, in essence, have more of that with a more progressive income tax. That was the equivalent of a maximum wage. And, we can all argue about where the right amount is, but over the last 20 years, it was 20 years ago we had a system that was more equalizing than what we have now. So, but the bottom line is I think we can all come up with a lot of possible solutions, but where I really believe is if we can sit down together and decide what those values are that we can all agree on, I think we're smart enough to come up with different solutions. And if this doesn't work that well, we try something else. It's, an iterative process. But I think the problem has been, or one of the problems, we haven't, again, it's that not looking towards unintended consequences, not being inclusive in terms of who's around the table, including, if we're thinking about, we need to have people from Senator Hargrove's district at the table as we're thinking about even what we're doing here in Seattle.
So in most of my legislative career, I fought to preserve the social safety net and funding for mental health, et cetera. In fact, I thought one of my biggest victories the last few years on the budget was to keep the legislature from re-upping the high-tech tax break and instead restoring grant payments to AFDC, Women with Children. And that was quite a struggle because our Democratic governor introduced it. And of course, we had a lot of Microsoft millionaires down there, some of them I like very fine, one regretfully passed away, Andy Hill, but worked very well with him. But Microsoft didn't need that tax break, and there was no metrics that it was going to create any more jobs in our area at all. But powerful people play to powerful money. And I'm not accusing anybody of any direct payments or bribes, and nothing like that. I'm just saying that, it's just your tendency is like, well, why did Hillary give speeches to the stock market and all those CEOs, wanting to, reassure them probably that she wasn't going to tear the world apart, So I think that part of this discussion you're having is allowing people to have different viewpoints that are sometimes really offensive to you without shouting them down, but instead listening to them and seeing whether there is some common ground to find. Let's bring up a great issue called guns. Okay, everybody here probably doesn't even think there's a need for anybody to have a gun. I mean, why would you? You call the police, they're at your house in 30 seconds. You dial 911. A minute, 2 minutes? Out where I live, it's an hour and a half for 2 sheriff's deputies covering Grays Harbor County. You know, so, and I have cougars in my backyard. And when I have my grandkids over, you know, I think
And we thought you were a husky.
Okay, let's be real plain here. My oldest son graduated from the University of Washington. My youngest son graduated from Washington State University,
Okay.
and they both still root for the Beavers. So, anyway, but I'm just saying that, you know, and I think that's part of what happened this last election. I hate to keep coming back to it, but, you know, even the polls showed that there's no way that it could go the way it did. I think people that were getting polled were afraid to answer on the phone. Because if they answered with their true feelings, they thought, oh, everybody knows what I'm saying, and I might get, you know, attacked or abused or lose my job or whatever because I have this opinion that's so disagreeable to the mainstream media elite, you know, if you will. And I don't think there's any coordinated strategy there. I just think that it's more and more kind of just seeing things from your own perspective and not living in that other world, you know? In Grays Harbor, we have more blue tarps on our roofs than probably any place else in the state. You know, when you talk about people having jobs, most of them have 2 minimum wage jobs, you know, maybe one at Walmart, maybe one someplace else. The decent paying jobs that were there in mills are gone, and the few mills that are left are under increasing pressure, regulatory pressure, that could cause them to, and then this just cracked me up completely. We have a mill down there, the Cosmo Pulp Mill, that makes an acetate pulp. They got a WTO sanction for unfair competition in China. They must make maybe 1/10 of the world's supply, but because of the way those rules are set up, they could be attacked by China, and they had to lose part of their market in China because they were unfairly trading. You know, I mean, it was just wild, you know? And so the whole, it seems like, at least it seems like to people out of my area, the whole system is set up against them. And I don't think, in fact, I think I've seen polls, something like 60 or 70% of the people who voted for Trump don't think he can do the job. It's just, we were getting screwed on the other side, so you might as well blow it up. You know, I hope, please, it doesn't blow up. But what I'm saying is that frustration is built up over 3 decades. I'm going to say one more thing, and then I'll let you go. 4 years ago, my last re-election, a guy ran against me that had no support from any statewide organization, okay? I mean, I had the teachers and the Association of Washington Business endorsing me. I had BIAW, Builders, and the Washington Environmental Council. You know, I had the NRA and the Children's Alliance. I had everybody, okay? And it wasn't because I lied to them, it was because they saw my record and how I worked over 28 years in the legislature. All this guy did was campaign against government. He says, if you think government's bad, he's been in for 28 years.
I want to ask.
And he got 35% of the vote, and I was like going nuts. 35%, and these used to be my homies, you know, people that were for property rights and guns, and they were all voting for the other guy just because I'd been in long and I hadn't fixed it. And I think that's kind of this frustration that bubbled up out there.
I want to ask the audience, how many people are really finding what Senator Hargrove is saying valuable and new to them? This is what inclusive innovation is all about. Okay, maybe not new, but valuable. But that's
Did
what
you come
inclusive
from the Olympic
innovation-
Peninsula, maybe?
But actually, here's my question: is you've mentioned all these wonderful, hints of ideas about what we're doing, rebuilding, and there's this demand to deal with climate change, and we live in a state where there are all these wealthy people and innovative people and highly educated people. What would you see as an entrepreneurial, innovative kind of solution for a test project in your market that would leverage all of these talents we have in our community and wouldn't be, universal income or a handout thing? What would be
So I love her. She broke all the rules and
So
went
we're going to
straight to
start
the
questions
end.
at 8 o'clock, but I'll let you
Yeah.
go. I'm not sure they got your question on audio. So
We
the
heard it.
question is,
You
but
wanna
you know,
repeat it?
yeah, you can repeat.
It
No
was
more
to you, I
questions
think.
until 8 o'clock.
Yeah. The question was to the president?
My question is to all of you. I mean, like, we have a brain trust here. What would you guys suggest? Like, what could we do that would be a model to show our country that we do care, we can work together, we can solve these problems, leveraging the creativity and talents of our community?
Well, I have an answer. The answer is we need to back off on some of the regulations on our forest industry right now.
Yeah.
We're getting ready to get swamped again with marbled murrelets. And anybody that knows anything about biology knows that if climate is changing and our environment is changing, the central area for a particular species is going to change with it. Yet our Endangered Species Act makes you keep every species wherever they ever were. So even if the environment moves to where they couldn't possibly survive there, you have a regulation that says that you have to bring everything down until they're all gone. And so that's really a problem, and we need some amendments to that to look at that in a rational way. We need to value wood products as a green solution to climate change, and then we need to steer that through mills in this state. I had a bill that would have done that. They had mills in this state, so we know the carbon's actually being sunk. If we just ship logs overseas, then it could be used in a plywood form and a concrete project in China and thrown in a burn pile. And so there's ways to do this with minor reasonable changes to some of our regulations, because we have lots of hardworking people out there that just want to get out and work. And they'll make their own wealth if they don't get stopped at every turn.
And there's
So I
two things
appreciate,
that,
sorry,
if I could just
I
say one
appreciate the
thing.
question. I'll get back to you in 1 minute. I appreciate the question which was asked, and I think there's a momentum here on discussion. So I encourage people to start writing down their questions right now so that we can have that discussion going forward. Now back to you.
No, I was saying one thing that, I mean, I agree that, Senator Hargrove has personalized it for me, but some of what he's been saying isn't new. What has been new, at least for me, is the regulations and the regulatory issues. I hadn't thought of it that way, and one of the things that perhaps we can be thinking about, I mean, we know that kind of what's happened geographically is we've got more and more people living in these urban centers, and they're smaller and smaller because we're dense in the urban centers, and then there's the rest of the world, which is larger in population mass, but maybe, as you're saying, that as we're thinking about policies and regulations, they might be different in the city than they are, just like, quite frankly, the speed limit is different when you're in a dense area where there's, a bunch of families than when you're out and, you can drive 100 miles and these 3 people. And so I think that we do have to be, I think, thinking a little bit less one rule for everybody, and particularly think about it as urban versus rural.
So I'll be glad to be on your board. I appreciated that statement.
Okay.
Okay.
You just recruited me, I'll be glad.
So I would just offer, I agree with that completely. I think Jim's, I have the same revelation or opened my eyes based on that, Jim's comments about regulation, and I'm going to be more thoughtful about that. Having said that, from a tax policy standpoint, I think more broadly than giving people a handout, I don't think that's the issue. I think there are many things that you can do, and by the way, when I say guaranteed security, I don't necessarily mean just handing people money. I think there's lots of things that you can do, but ultimately it comes down to distribution of tax dollars. And one of the things we've seen is states and really municipalities chasing business, chasing folks to make investment without enough focus on some of those rural areas. And so, why give tax zones and other incentives near urban areas as opposed to focusing some of that opportunity in more rural areas to entice Tesla to build a plant, out in a rural area. And I think there's a lot that can be done with tax policy, and that will look like redistribution. People will accuse folks of doing it that way, but I think that's an appropriate alternative to what we're doing today with tax policy in many states and cities.
So I have to follow up on that in a real macro and specific way right now. First of all, I support a capital gains tax. That would be great. I don't think you'll pass an income tax in the state, but I think capital gains tax, there's a chance, okay? But right now, this session in the legislature, which I'm not at, thank God, they're having to look at the McCleary decision and how to take and fund basic education with a fair tax system around the state. The property tax rate on the local M&O levy in Hoquiam and Aberdeen is $6 a thousand or something close to that. In Seattle, it's $1.35. They are paying over 3 times as much property tax for a basic education in a rural area. What businessman in his right mind would even build a lumber mill in Grace Harbor when your property tax rate would be less in West Seattle? I mean, that, and I'm a Democrat, but the Republicans just came out with a plan to cap the local M&O levies, raise the state property tax levy, which means that Seattle will pay a little more and these rural areas will pay a little less. That's the kind of macro tax policy change that would make investment easier. Instead of, and I don't mean to be derogatory, but instead of one little kind of pilot project or little take and policy thing that maybe works. I worked on those. I passed B&O tax credits for new manufacturing jobs in distressed areas. I passed sales tax on new plant and equipment forgiveness in distressed areas. I did all of those little tiny tax things, and it helped a little bit a couple of times. It never really got in there and made these big changes. But what I'm saying is there's an opportunity right now, you know, for Seattle to step up and say, we'll take a tiny bit more property tax in our property-rich areas. All your skyscrapers and all this stuff go into your schools, and level it out so that we have a fair tax rate across the state on property taxes. And that would help people make investments in rural areas.
Agree.
You know, so it's just something real specific, and I know somebody's going to be mad at me for saying that, but anyway.
Wonderful. So we're going to continue the questions. I have one on Twitter, speaking of technology. This is focused, the question is for President Kause. Given that UW is a center of innovation, how can UW reach the disenfranchised in rural areas like Senator Hargrove to teach and inspire innovation and that traditional American solution, which is the entrepreneurial spirit?
Well, I think that we do it in 2 different ways. One is, if you actually look at our student population, we have right here in Seattle, at least for a short period of time, students from rural areas. In fact, you know, one of the things that we work on during our orientation is that we do have some students that come here, and this university is the biggest place they've ever been. And so, you know, by having them come here, get an education, learn, and then hopefully go back into their communities, but that's where there have to be jobs. That's one role that we play, but also we send our students out. I was at a presentation the other day on alternative spring break. And so for some people, you know, they take their spring break, they go to Fort Lauderdale or wherever, and you know, all those movies that we've seen where they do those things that I don't want to talk about because our students don't do that. But instead, we do have this program called Alternative Spring Break, and often these are students that they've gone to Neah Bay and helped develop some of the technology infrastructure in Lake Hable, et cetera, Colville Reservation, and do tutoring, so that we send our students out. One of the things that I do right after graduation is we do a faculty field tour, and I get on a bus with 30 of my closest new faculty members, and we go around the state. And part of it is that we want them to see where their students come, and we stop in Yakima, and we stop in Colville, and we haven't done the Olympic Peninsula. We have to do that next. But we go around the state so they see where their students are from. But what's interesting is they also can start thinking of, hey, this that I do here, would be really interesting. And I think that we do send our students out and our faculty. We are the University of Washington, not of Seattle and not of Puget Sound. And we are trying to build lots of bridges. You went out to Spokane to do one of these chats.
So I have an idea. And the idea is that you would call the president of Grace Harbor College and put a 4-year degree program in Grace Harbor. Because one of our biggest problems is that our youth are leaving our area. They go to the University of Washington and they don't come back because the jobs aren't there. They stayed there, and I don't know which degree it is. You could work that out. But I'll let you do that part. But the point is that if they can stay there and get a degree in something that they're fairly likely to be able to work in that local area, maybe it has to do with CLT or climate change or something down there, it's going to be something that helps us keep our youth, our next generation there to build on.
Well, we have been working, and this is, pretty much the first time we've been doing that, is we've got a coalition of community and technical colleges that we're working with. We do have an online completion program, students that have 2 years of college, 2 more, but it's not really aimed at the kind of jobs you're talking about. But you know what? I'm going to do it.
Thank you.
I don't promise the outcome, but I promise the phone call. And we'll see, because I think we could do something.
We're missing something. It's UWT. We're doing that.
There you go.
UWT, we're completely forgetting our campus there.
Well, but are you doing it in Grays Harbor?
No, but we're doing it there. We're building jobs. We're building.
Oh, absolutely.
We're building
No
opportunities
question.
for students. So we're doing it. It's not just Seattle.
Oh, no, agreed.
So
I mean, most of our growth has been in Bothell and Tacoma.
right.
So there's no question.
Where we're doing this, and we can do it in that other area as well. But we're already doing it and doing it.
When I said we're going to do it, I didn't mean it had to be the Seattle campus. I meant that the university could end up doing. In fact, I mean, we're having conversations right now with another community college, Federal Way, and trying to serve that community. So I didn't mean necessarily us, but reaching out to the Grays Harbor community would be, I want to make that phone call. Yeah.
So go on to the next question, which is completely irrelevant to whatever is happening around us. Many of the constraints discussed tonight point to government needing change. How do we innovate government itself besides the elections?
Well, I'll step in. I mean, I think personally, the most important thing to do, is rethink the length of terms. I think people running for 2 years spend their entire time running, and that 2-year terms don't give you enough time to do much. I also think that you were talking about, and it's true, that if the first thing a politician wants to do is to be elected and to be reelected, and that requires money. And so that ends up, whether you're thinking about it consciously or not, you end up being beholden and really be able to think about reform in terms of, not just putting a cap on how much, you can only, you can give 5 of your closest friends another $2,000, but really think about not developing some system where everybody has the same amount to spend on their election.
So I think part of the reason that money works in elections is because people believe the garbage that gets put out in the advertising. That's why there's negative campaigning, because it works. I was
Yeah, we do know that.
fortunate enough, never had to do that. In fact, I went almost 20 years without an opponent, so that made my policy work a little easier. But I must have been doing something fairly right,
Or the job must have
they-
been.
Well,
Or my people just don't even have a newspaper or something, I don't know. But I think that's kind of interesting because that's kind of a reverse term limit comment. And actually, term limits is one of the dumbest things that I've ever heard of because lobbyists aren't term limited, bureaucrats aren't term limited, staff that work for the committees and the caucuses, they're not term limited. So the only people you're going to term limit are the ones you get to elect. It just, sometimes I'd have to go 10, 12, 14 years of following a policy that not only did I get passed, signed by the governor and put into law, but I'd have to chase agencies around to try to get them to implement it. And we'd have to tweak the budget and beat on them and work on them. And I had some agency directors say, I can't believe the total disdain that most of my staff have for the legislature. Like they don't know what they're talking about, and we're going to do everything we can not to do that. And if you can't stay there long enough to get a hold of the right person by the whatever, then you know you're not going to make those changes, even if you have the legislature pass good things. Another thing that I was fortunate enough to see happen over the last, well, until recently, I'll give you two things, two trends. One is that in my tenure, we started using data a lot more to make policy decisions. The Washington Institute for Public Policy is a nationally renowned group that does all sorts of analysis, and so we know if we change this sentence here or change that policy there, we're gonna have more crime, less crime, we're gonna have more problems with mental health, less, and we worked more and more on that. And that's the positive side of the change I saw. The negative side is tweaks or twerks or whatever it is, you know? Twitter, okay. Anyway, it's a funny joke, but the
just think
speaker
about-
said, somebody asked the Speaker of the House why he didn't tweet. He said, I twerk too. Anyway, so,
Oh, no, but think, you were think about how much money was spent on this presidential election. And, you know,
and Hillary spent almost twice as much as Trump, I think,
yes,
you know,
no,
and lost.
I'm not,
So I have a pet peeve in this area, and it's generally around participation. We are still, you know, at an amazingly low level of participation in the country. It's one of the things that drives me crazy and makes me wonder, what can we do? And what would happen if we had participation up closer to 75, 80%? You know, what would that be like? At a minimum, my sense is that everyone would be more attentive. And even those folks that are just working 2 and 3 jobs, you know, but I think in order to get to that point, we're probably going to have to move to a situation where we have some offsets or some incentives for people to vote, because frankly, for a lot of folks, it's expensive and hard to vote. And so I'm looking forward to a point, and I'm thinking actively in terms of how I spend my time. That's where I'm putting my time in the process, is thinking about and trying to work on how do we get participation up much higher.
So another trend, I was going to say the second trend, the first was data. The second trend that I think's been negative is all of the instant media. When I first came into the legislature, we communicated with our constituents by snail mail. I was in 32 years, by the way. I served 1/4 of the history of the state in the legislature. And by regular phone, dial-up phone. We'd call them up, they dialed in on a hotline. Well, then it was emails, and then it was internet, and then it was tweets, and then it was everything else. And I think the public gets too much information. And and maybe not you guys, you're all smart, but the average public gets way too much information. And so what do? They tend to devolve to the talk show host on one side or the other of the issue, because it sounds like they're making sense and they must have studied it out. And so we end up getting, and those people don't tend to talk about issues, they tend to just do ad hominem attacks. That's a Latin word I just learned, you know. But basically it gets more and more personal, it gets more and more derogatory. And even Lynn Kessler, my seatmate, said, you know, that's the biggest problem, is that it's not civil discourse anymore on an issue. It's, you know, if you don't agree with somebody, you start calling them a bigot, or you start calling them a racist, or you start calling them a Luddite, or whatever. You know, I mean, it's just named, and you know, and it doesn't become a civil discourse. And to the extent that our technology has made it worse, from my perspective, is that there's so much information out there that people can't
one of my
digest it.
favorite new courses, I think it's being taught next quarter, is how to spot BS in science.
Well, yeah, the fake news stories now. I mean, that's become, I think.
We should do one called How to Spot BS in News.
But, you know, it's hard to distinguish, you know, because, I mean, I used to break reporters into 3 groups, and this was before I quit talking to them at all. The first was people that thought they should be unbiased and were pretty good at it. The second third was people that thought they should be unbiased and weren't good at it at all. And the third group was people that thought it was their job to educate people into their thought, and so they twisted every story to do that. And, you know, it's hard for me to deal with this, but my son is a broadcasting major and working in news right now. But I guess the point is that sometimes you have energetic reporters that give you the detail and the substance and the balance on a story. And I'd have to say, still, the newspaper does better than that than anybody else, okay? And then you have ones like a lot of the Olympia Press Corps that would come up to me and say, did you hear so-and-so said you were an X? What do you think about that? Well, that might not have even been a true comment. But then when I make a comment, they've got something quotable. And so they've got this pissing match back and forth that they created, but it's easy to write those stories, and they get headlines, and it's cheap copy, and and their editor's happy, and people read the newspaper. We need to remember that media is a business.
Yeah.
And we had one of the reporters come to Olympia, I think it was over 15 years ago, and say their television station brought a consultant in to tell them how to make money, and they said, government waste. If you will just do one of those 5-second things, we found government waste, then you'll get people to watch your news. And even if your story's total crap, like somebody ordered a pizza at a prison, an inmate ordered a pizza at a prison, like that's government waste, it might be a security issue. But the point is, it gets people to watch. And the more people that watch, the more you can sell that advertising for. And the more you sell that advertising more, the more lucrative your company is. So we gotta remember that that's what's going on, and that's why just participation, but participation with people that are fed by that.
Well, Jim, I think you mentioned a key thought there, which is we've lost our newspapers, and that was the real journalism ethic that came from journalism education and the newspapers is a lost cause. And I would implore you all to go to your paywalls and pay for, pay for journalism, pay for what we were getting for before, and we're not paying for, and we're getting a much worse product with much more of a economic motive behind it.
Investigative reporting is not cheap.
Yeah.
Well, and ethics in journalism. I think it's taught still, but I'm not sure how it plays out in the moneyed world. That in World War II, the press was told about D-Day before it happened, and they all kept it quiet until it happened. But when we attacked Baghdad, CNN was there with cameras telling they were the best.
Yeah.
It was like, who gets the story first and all of that stuff. It's just, there's no discretion.
On balance, I think there are ethical journalists and journalism out there. Mm-hmm. The challenge is that their business model has fallen apart.
That's right.
And we own that. So, we're going to have to contribute if we want it to be, to still be out there.
And it's a tricky business. You can't have a government-run
But
newspaper
that's
either.
an example of unintended consequences. And rather than just, I see a lot of people, oh, well, that's going out the window. Yeah. It's like, well, if this was valuable, let's figure out how to do something about it rather than, oh, well, think of what we're losing when we, lose. Newspapers, have been honest brokers.
Absolutely.
In many ways, and that is lost, and it's not the same when you, read those stories from sources that who knows what. And the media, I really do, I am concerned about that cycle. We're constantly, that's something that I've been trying to talk to some of our students about, is that we can't, right now we are getting, whether it's due to inexperience or the first week or whatever, but, constantly, whether through tweets or new, it's like something new. I'm kind of like, well, what's happened this evening?
It's clickbait,
And, yeah, and, and so you start getting into a reactive mode. And, we need to be able to, think and take things in and think big and think long term, and that's very hard when things are coming at you like that. And, life is a marathon, not a sprint.
And that relates to our topic. I'll bring everybody back here because the reaction to media affects legislators that are making your policy, or congressmen and women that are making your policy, because they're seeing how things are reacting, and those longer terms might be a great idea, because instead of knowing that year after next, they might have that story. What I tried to tell young legislators is today's story, the public isn't going to remember tomorrow, because there'll be another new one out on top, so don't worry about it. But it was hard for them not to look at all of that and worry about it and react to it, and some of them just lived by that.
So speaking about instant media, I see we're just out of time, but I'd love to leave the audience with something. In 30 seconds each, something hopeful and optimistic that you can give to the audience from each of your viewpoints, starting with you, Ken.
One of the things I'm very hopeful about is the impact of technology and innovation on healthcare. I think that there will be opportunity in the next 10 to 15 years where we're going to break the back of two of the three: obesity, cancer, or heart disease. And that's the good news. Bad news is that's going to break all the actuarial tables. We'll have a little bit of financial crisis for a bit, but we'll work through that. The good news is more people are going to live longer.
Well, for me, I mean, what kind of buoys me during difficult times and occasionally makes me crazy is our students and youth. I mean, the idealism that's there, the way in which, you look at, our students who are involved in entrepreneurship, and so much of it is socially oriented, that it's just absolutely amazing. The percent, we have the #1 school in the country year after year in terms of the number of students that we graduate into the Peace Corps. The amount of volunteer work, we have, folks like the Dream Project that are going out into, South King County and doing tutoring and helping them fill out applications. And yeah, sometimes they're in my face and they make me crazy too. But, I just think that whenever I'm feeling, and I have my moments, I just spend time with students and it just energizes you. And I hope that you get to spend some time with our students or students at other universities. It really is. I think that youth is the thing that keeps me incredibly optimistic, but we do need some guidance. We do need to make sure that our curriculum doesn't get so technological that they're not studying about ethics, that they're not learning about those things that make us human, that includes the arts, and that they're not full people. So
You're here.
So I'm thinking about the concept of equity as opposed to equality. And we think of that in terms of African Americans and Latinos and all sorts of other minority groups. But you might want to start thinking of that in terms of rural, urban, too. And the fact that when I said one size doesn't fit all, there's an equity issue there. You can't have the same policies in areas that are already so far behind economically and unemployment, et cetera, because those same policies keep people in the disproportionate downside going into the future. So I think you've all seen that famous cartoon of equity where you've got the little kid standing on the box and the next kid and all their heads are over the, well, think of the rural areas as that little kid standing on the biggest box. And that's what I'd like to leave with you.
This has been fascinating, and obviously it's an ongoing discussion, but I really appreciate the different viewpoints and how eloquent and sticking to time everyone was. And this is an ongoing conversation. After we applaud the speakers, I'm going to make 2 announcements, but let's applause for our speakers here.
That was fun. Really well fun.
this is really fun.
It was great.
And
Thank
I will
you.
call.
So the first announcement is really related to redistribution of wealth. Karen back there has collected the backpack and coats and jackets, and they're down here. In case you don't want redistribution of wealth, you can come and collect them from here. But the second part is I'm delighted that we have Ross Reynolds and Carolyn Dodge from KUOW who are here, who will offer a next step. Because as you said, this is an ongoing conversation for those who feel compelled to take action and get involved and discuss. Ross and Caroline will tell you about a program they're kicking off, which is called Ask Fill in the Blank, which enables one-to-one conversations, which people you may never have the chance to speak with on topics you have not been able to broach. Their first discussion was Ask a Muslim, was the first one. So their goal is to have people from different social, ethnic, and cultural backgrounds meet one-to-one. And talk about inclusive innovation, this was funded by the Amazon Catalyst program, which is a partnership with CoMotion and the University of Washington. So with that, again, let's stand with speakers and have Ross talk about the program.
Yeah, thanks very much. Caroline's giving me the opportunity to talk on the mic today. One disruption that we've had in our society is conversation. Conversation is seriously disrupted by these devices and by the fact that, as we've heard alluded to this evening, we live in bubbles. Sometimes people are afraid to express themselves because they feel they're going to be shouted down. Just about a year ago, when our now president was talking about banning Muslims from the country, it occurred to me that how many of us actually have had a chance to talk to Muslims or even know Muslims? And if we do know them, do we feel comfortable talking about religion or politics? And out of that arose a program that Carolyn and I worked on called Ask a Muslim. Basically, it was pretty simple. It was like speed dating. 8 Muslims talked to 8 non-Muslims for 6 minutes each. They moved on to a second person, and after that, we had a group conversation, and then we had a meal. There was a really strong reaction to it. We did it again last August and had a very positive reaction. And thanks to the Commotion program, the Amazon Commotion program, we're going to be making that bigger this year. We're starting a whole new series of these discussions in order to try to talk to people in our society who we might think we know a lot about, but we might not know a lot about. Maybe we should have this in Grace Harbor, because one of them will be Ask a Trump Supporter.
Well, how
I
about ask a logger?
Ask a logger is another good idea. When I ask people, have you talked to any Trump supporters, they do, and they have this expression.
We had some on campus the other.
Doesn't always go well. Well, we're going to try to create a structure for some civil conversations along those lines. Ask a Trump supporter, ask a cop, ask a transgender person, ask an immigrant. And we hope that these discussions are going to be able to have a ripple effect outwards, and the end product of this will be to create a toolkit so that as people find out about it, they might want to start their own conversations. It's up on our website right now. If you go to KUOW and just search for KUOW's Ask a series, you'll see a more thorough description of this, and also a place where you can sign up for it, where you might want to be someone who answers, or you might want to be someone who asks.
Come do it in our cafeteria. We have every single one of those that you talked about at our university.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ross. And you've been a great audience. Thank you so much.